Okay, so this sounds like a joke, right? Like something from a satirical news site or a meme that got out of hand. The United States buying Greenland, an entire island, the world's largest island, just purchasing it like you'd buy a house or a car. Except here's the thing. This isn't new. This isn't some crazy idea that popped up yesterday. The United States has actually tried to buy Greenland before. Multiple times. First attempt? 1867. Yeah, the same year the US bought Alaska from Russia. Secretary of State William Seward was on a shopping spree, apparently. He tried to buy Greenland from Denmark. They said no. Second attempt? 1946. Right after World War II, when the US realized how strategically important Greenland was, they'd had military bases there during the war. President Truman offered Denmark $100 million in gold. That's about $1.5 billion in today's money. Denmark said no again. And then, of course, 2019. Trump floated the idea, probably saw Greenland on a map, and thought, that's big, I want it. Offered to buy it. Denmark's prime minister called the idea absurd. Trump canceled a state visit to Denmark in response. It was a whole diplomatic mess. But now, in 2026, let's imagine it actually happens. Let's say the US makes an offer Denmark and Greenland can't refuse. Maybe $500 billion, maybe $1 trillion. Who knows? Money talks, right? What happens next? Buckle up, because the world gets a lot more complicated, a lot more tense, and honestly, a lot more cynical. Why does the US even want Greenland? Let's start with the obvious question. Why? Why does the United States, a country that already has Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Guam, and a dozen other territories, want a giant frozen island with 57,000 people on it? The answer is simple. The Arctic is the future, and Greenland is the key to the Arctic. Climate change, yeah, I know, depressing topic, is melting Arctic ice faster than anyone predicted. By 2026, summer ice coverage is at historic lows, and you know what that means? New shipping routes, new resource access, new military positioning. The Northwest Passage, which runs along the northern coast of North America through the Arctic, is becoming navigable for longer periods each year. Ships can cut weeks off the journey from Europe to Asia by going through the Arctic instead of the Panama or Suez canals. Whoever controls access to the Arctic controls these routes. And Greenland sits right in the middle of it all. It's the geographic choke point. It's like owning the toll booth on the highway everyone has to use. The US already has Thule Air Base in northwest Greenland, one of the most important military installations in the world. It's home to early warning systems for ballistic missiles, satellite tracking, and surveillance. It's been there since the Cold War. It's never stopped being crucial. But if the US actually owns Greenland, now we're talking about expanding that presence massively. More bases, more surveillance, complete control over approaches to North America from the north. Think about it from a military perspective. Russia is right across the Arctic. China is increasingly active in Arctic shipping and research. If you're the US military, you want Greenland badly. It's the ultimate strategic position for monitoring and defending against threats from the Arctic. Here's where it gets really interesting from an economic standpoint. Greenland is sitting on massive deposits of rare earth elements, those obscure minerals with weird names like neodymium, dysprosium, and praseodymium that are absolutely essential for modern technology. You need rare earths for smartphones, electric vehicle batteries, wind turbines, advanced military systems, basically everything that defines 21st century technology. And right now, China controls about 70% of global rare earth production. The US has been desperately trying to reduce dependence on China for these materials. Greenland could be the answer. Estimates suggest Greenland has some of the world's largest untapped rare earth deposits, plus uranium, zinc, lead, and potentially significant oil and gas reserves. If the US owns Greenland, they own those resources. Energy independence isn't just about oil anymore. It's about the materials that make batteries, chips, and advanced tech. Greenland is a jackpot. As the Arctic ice melts, shipping companies are already planning new routes. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's coast, the Northwest Passage through Canada and Greenland. These routes could cut 40% off shipping times between major ports in Europe and Asia. Control Greenland, and you control access, regulations, and traffic through a significant portion of these routes. That's economic leverage. That's geopolitical power. That's the ability to say who gets to use these passages and under what terms. Now, let's talk about the sellers. Denmark technically owns Greenland. It's an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. But Greenland has its own government, its own parliament, and has been moving toward independence for years. So if this sale happens, both Denmark and Greenland have to agree. What's in it for them? Let's say the US offers $750 billion. That's a number I'm pulling out of thin air. But it's the kind of massive sum that might actually make this conversation real. For Denmark, that's an enormous injection of cash. Denmark's entire GDP is about $400 billion. This would be almost double their annual economic output, paid out over time. They could pay off national debt, invest in infrastructure, fund social programs for generations. For Greenland's 57,000 residents, if even a portion of that money goes directly to them or to Greenland's future, we're talking life-changing wealth. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, economic development, everything they've struggled to fund with fishing revenues and subsidies from Denmark suddenly becomes possible. Greenland is vulnerable. It can't defend itself. Right now, Denmark provides defense, but Denmark is a small European country. The U.S. is a superpower. And American Greenland gets the full protection of the U.S. military. That means no worrying about Russian incursions, Chinese research stations that are obviously intelligence-gathering operations, or any external threats. The U.S. military umbrella is comprehensive. For Denmark, there's also an element of burden sharing. Defending Greenland is expensive and complicated. Selling it to the U.S. means that's no longer Denmark's problem. But here's the dark side, the thing that makes this complicated and honestly kind of sad. Greenland has been moving toward independence for decades. The Greenlandic people have their own culture, their own language, Greenlandic, an Inuit language, their own identity separate from Denmark. Selling Greenland to the U.S. doesn't give them independence. It trades one colonial relationship for another. Sure, the U.S. might offer Greenland significant autonomy, maybe even a special status like Puerto Rico or a more generous arrangement. But let's be real. When you sell territory to a superpower, that superpower calls the shots. Greenland goes from being an autonomous territory working toward independence to being an American possession. The Greenlandic people might be incredibly divided on this. Some might see the economic opportunities and security. Others might see it as a betrayal, selling out their future independence for American dollars. Denmark also loses a piece of its identity and history. Greenland has been connected to Denmark for centuries. Selling it is admitting that relationship is over, that it's purely transactional now. All right, now we get to the really interesting part. What happens to the rest of the world when the U.S. buys Greenland? Russia is not going to be happy. Not even a little bit. The Arctic is Russia's backyard. They have the longest Arctic coastline of any country. They've been investing heavily in Arctic military bases, icebreakers, and infrastructure. The Northern Sea Route is a key part of Russia's economic and strategic future. And American Greenland means the U.S. has a permanent, massive presence right in the Arctic theater. It's like Russia waking up and finding out the U.S. just moved into the house next door and installed a bunch of security cameras pointing at their windows. Russia will respond, probably by accelerating their own Arctic militarization. More bases on islands like Franz Josef Land and Novaya Zemlya. More icebreakers. They already have the world's largest fleet, but they'll expand it. More aggressive patrolling of what they claim as their Arctic waters. We're talking about an Arctic arms race. The Cold War was bad enough when it was mostly focused on Central Europe. Now imagine that same tension playing out in one of the most remote, harsh, and strategically important regions on Earth. China is going to freak out too, just in a different way. China doesn't have Arctic territory, but they've declared themselves a near-Arctic state, which is diplomatic speak from we want in on this. They've been investing in Arctic shipping, building icebreakers, funding research stations, trying to get footholds wherever they can. China's Belt and Road Initiative includes a Polar Silk Road, their plan to use Arctic routes for trade. And American Greenland complicates that significantly. The U.S. could potentially restrict or control access in ways that hurt Chinese interests. China's response would probably be economic and diplomatic, ramping up partnerships with Russia on Arctic development, investing even more heavily in alternative routes and technologies, maybe getting more aggressive about claiming influence in other Arctic-adjacent regions. And here's the kicker. China might start looking at other territorial opportunities. If the U.S. can just buy strategic territory, why can't China? Suddenly, smaller nations with valuable resources or positioning might find themselves getting very generous offers from Beijing. Right now, the world's main tension points are places like Ukraine, Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Middle East. The Arctic has been relatively quiet, cold in more ways than one. American ownership of Greenland changes that overnight. The Arctic becomes militarized. Every nation with Arctic interests, US, Russia, Canada, Norway, Denmark, if they still have territories there, Sweden, Finland, and China, starts positioning for advantage. We'd see more military exercises in Arctic waters, more incidents between rival ships and aircraft, more disputes over territorial waters, exclusive economic zones, and who has the right to extract resources where. There's also the environmental angle. Increased military and commercial activity in a fragile Arctic ecosystem accelerates damage. Indigenous communities, the Inuit and other Arctic peoples, get caught in the middle of superpower competition. The Arctic, which should be a region for international cooperation on climate and science, becomes another battlefield. But here's what really worries me about this scenario. It's not just about Greenland or the Arctic or US-Russia-China tensions. It's about what this does to the entire international system. We live in an era where Theoretically, you can't just buy and sell territory anymore. The post-World War II international order established principles: sovereignty, self-determination, territorial integrity. You can't just invade and annex. Russia tried in Ukraine and got sanctioned to hell. You can't colonize. The era of empires is over, except if the US buys Greenland, that precedent is shattered. Suddenly, territory is for sale again. If you have enough money and the right leverage, you can expand your borders. You can acquire strategic positions. You can literally buy your way to greater power. What stops other countries from doing the same? China offering to buy Pacific Islands from cash-strapped nations? Russia making offers for former Soviet republics that are economically struggling? Wealthy Gulf states purchasing African ports? The global land grab would be back on, just with checkbooks instead of armies. Well, checkbooks backed by armies, let's be honest. For decades, international relations operated under certain norms: respect for sovereignty, multilateral institutions like the UN having at least some authority. The idea that might doesn't automatically make right, even if it often does in practice. The US purchasing Greenland says those rules are optional. If you have the power and the money, you can reshape the map. You can ignore norms when it's convenient. Other powerful nations will notice. If the US doesn't have to play by the old rules, why should they? China accelerates efforts to control the South China Sea. Who is going to stop them if the US just bought Greenland? Russia gets more aggressive in its near abroad. After all, the Americans just purchased an entire island. The international order, which was already fraying, just tears a bit more. Here's the philosophical shift that happens. The world becomes even more transactional and cynical than it already is. Smaller nations realize they're not really sovereign. They're assets that can be bought if the price is right. Their independence, their self-determination. It's all conditional on whether a major power wants them badly enough. Trust between nations erodes further. If Denmark can sell Greenland after centuries of connection, what relationship is actually stable? What alliance can't be bought out from under you? The idea of international cooperation for shared goals, fighting climate change, preventing pandemics, exploring space, gets harder. Why cooperate when you can just purchase the advantage you need? Diplomacy becomes more nakedly about power and money. The pretense of values, of rules-based order, of international law, it all becomes more obviously window dressing for great power competition. You might be thinking, okay, interesting geopolitics, but what does this mean for me? Fair question. If you're not Greenlandic, Danish, or American, why should you care? Because this affects global stability, which affects your life more than you realize. Shipping costs. If Arctic routes become contested territory with unpredictable access, shipping gets more expensive and complicated. That means higher prices for goods, resource prices. The scramble for rare earths and other resources drives up prices and creates supply instability. Your smartphone, your electric vehicle, your laptop all get more expensive. Military tensions. More money spent on Arctic militarization means less money for other priorities. Higher defense budgets, more taxes or less social spending. Climate. Increased Arctic activity accelerates environmental damage in a region that's crucial for global climate regulation. Faster ice melt, more emissions from shipping and military operations. Precedent for instability. If powerful nations can just buy territory, smaller nations become targets. Regional instability increases. The risk of conflicts, economic, diplomatic, or military, goes up. For Greenlanders, the impact is direct and personal. Their lives change completely. Maybe they get wealth and opportunity. Maybe they lose their path to independence and their cultural identity gets diluted. Probably both. For Americans, there's the cost, hundreds of billions of dollars, and the question of whether it's worth it. Plus, the US suddenly has responsibility for governing an Arctic territory with unique challenges and a population that might not particularly want to be American. For everyone else, it's watching the world order shift and wondering what comes next. So, what if the US buys Greenland? The Arctic becomes the new focal point of great power competition. Russia and China react aggressively. Military tensions increase. The race for resources and control intensifies. The international order takes another hit. Norms about sovereignty and territorial integrity weaken further. The precedent of purchasing strategic territory reopens possibilities that were supposed to be closed. The world becomes more transactional, more cynical, more nakedly about power and money than even it already is. And Greenland? It becomes an American possession, for better or worse. Its people gain economic opportunity, but potentially lose their path to true independence. Their future becomes tied to American interests, rather than their own aspirations. Is it worth it? Depends on who you ask and what you value. For the US, from a cold strategic perspective, probably yes. Greenland is an incredible asset for the 21st century. For Greenland, it's complicated. Money and security versus independence and identity. For the world, it's probably net negative. More instability, more tension, weaker international norms. But here's the thing. In 2026, with rising great power competition, climate change opening the Arctic, and increasing cynicism about international cooperation. It's not as crazy as it sounds. Trump tried in 2019 and got laughed at, but the strategic logic hasn't changed. It's only gotten stronger. The Arctic is opening up. The competition for resources is intensifying. The value of Greenland is increasing every year. So while it sounds absurd, while it seems like something from an alternate timeline, it's actually not that far-fetched. And that honestly might be the scariest part of all.